You should see a red button that says record in the upper left-hand corner. So that means that we're recording. And so I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight to Exit Realty West Midtown Presents. Um, we will, if you have questions throughout, feel free to either raise your hand or pop your question in the chat. And I will be assisting Dr. Shay in monitoring the chat. So if there are questions, we'll make sure that we get those answered. And then I'm going to turn it over to Maya, that's my daughter, to Michael to do the introduction of Dr. Shay.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. What we do here at Exit Realty West Midtown, we do these monthly discussions, and this being Mental Health Awareness Month, so we wanted to bring some light to that area. And Dr. Shay has been gracious enough to give us some time to kind of talk about that topic. And just to give you a background on who Dr. Shay is, she's a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's a clinical supervisor and an owner of Dr. Shay Speaks. So well respected in her field for sure. So thank you again, Dr. Shay. She works in the medical health field for 20 plus years, in higher education for 8 years. So she specializes in self-care, work-life balance, grief, caregiving, well-being, health, marriage, family, diversity, family business, and sports, entertainment, and family concerns. So as you see, she has a vast array of knowledge that she brings to bear to discuss with us this evening, and we couldn't be more excited and grateful that she gave us some time this evening, to discuss this important topic around mental health. So without further ado, Dr. Shay, thank you again. Your floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I love kind of advocating for the profession. As many of us know, even though we're improving, there's still a stigma as it relates to mental health and getting services. And there's also still some disparities in terms of access to services and awareness about how important that is. So I am going to share my screen. I do have, let's see, do I have presenter privileges? It's a little bit different this time from our practice session. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're muted. There it is. Okay, now.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So, this topic is interesting because it's entitled Life After COVID, and looking at the news the past couple of weeks, we're like, oh goodness, are we post-pandemic, or what are we doing here? And so it definitely brings about some anxiety, but we can only control what we can control. And so my hope for this presentation is that we focus on coping and resilience and how to thrive no matter where we are on the spectrum in terms of our stance on vaccines or boosters, or going to school or work virtually, or going back into the office, deciding what kinds of activities to be engaged in. Regardless of those decisions, we have to figure out a way to make it through this. And so with the emphasis on mental health, we want to think about our mental emotional state and all the things that go along with that. And so just a quick check-in. I know if you're like me, you are great at multitasking. And so with that requires really being intentional about your times of reflection. And so one of the things that I would invite you to do is just to check in briefly as it relates to what I'm calling the metaphor of a mask. We have certainly throughout this pandemic, as a protection against COVID-19, put on this mask this physical thing that we cover our nose and mouth with to protect us from airborne illnesses and things of that nature. But some of us, when we think about mental health, put on all kinds of masks every day for different reasons, pre and post pandemic. And so I want you to think for a second about what you are attempting to cover, what you are attempting to protect, and what you are attempting and ready to reveal or free yourself of. And so as we go through this presentation this evening, again, I invite you to think about those things. And as we wear these tangible physical masks, think about the metaphorical masks we wear in terms of hiding, covering, protecting, deciding to reveal. So one of the things as it relates to the pandemic, especially with this audience largely being the business sector, telework. Now, some people were thrust into this quickly where some might have had this option before. And there are so many things that prompt anxiety with that. A lot of people don't think about how mental and emotional health is related to all of the nuances in the work environment. A lot of times we only want to focus on individual and couples and families as it relates to that. But it's very important, and especially for any entrepreneurs, anybody in administration or management, you definitely want to understand how any kind of change really can prompt anxiety for various reasons. And so some of the things related to transitioning to telework, are you proficient with technology? Do you have the appropriate devices? Is your sector fit for different tasks related to telework? And are you prepared for that? Is your environment set up for that? So are you having protected environments in your building? Are you encouraging people to work from home? Do you know what's going on in their home environment in terms of the many things that they might be juggling, family responsibilities and the like? And in the business world, a lot of people started wanting consultations and some support on how do we teach people about virtual etiquette, you know, the things related to that. And so all of that absolutely relates to our mental and emotional health, because I think we would all agree that work can be a stressor or a strength. And so it is certainly important to think about those factors. And so while some people are having what they're calling Zoom fatigue or virtual work fatigue, other people think it's fabulous. They've enjoyed working from home. They've enjoyed the flexibility. They're trying to figure out how they can make it last a little bit longer, even though some people are already required to come back in the office. And honestly, some people are contemplating the kind of work that they want to do. I think we have all read the articles or seen the headlines about the mass resignation across different industries. And that's largely because when we're thrust in these kinds of situations, we can't help but contemplate how we want to spend our time and energy. And the workplace is not is exempt from that. Certainly, certain people don't have the flexibility and the luxury of choosing, but many people who do, who are very marketable, who have access to different types of employment options, have certainly decided to either negotiate with their existing employer, or if you're a business owner, figure out how to give your employees more flexibility, because that often translates into retention. And then other people are deciding what other options they might want to pursue. So the telework and the work environment is definitely something that not only impacts our industry from a financial perspective, but from a mental and emotional perspective as well. The next, for those of us who are parents, is decisions related to children and school. Similar to the contemplation regarding the many factors of the work environment, parents have gone through many of these decisions. And not only does this apply to K through 12, but also colleges and universities as well, and graduate schools. And so the same kinds of things apply. As we know, children and adolescents and young adults, you know, their brains are still developing. And so they may not have all of the regulatory skills in place. And so again, any kind of change, any kind of stress level, it's going to take trial and error to have a sense of comfort and confidence as they're going through that. One of the things that was revealed, like many things, is all of the disparities related to, not every child has a laptop. Not every child has a private room to focus on their work. Not everybody has food to keep them sustained in order to be able to focus on work, or getting the proper sleep and things of that nature. And then the well-being of the parents. And so, as we know, it's a ripple effect. Children are a reflection of how well the parents are doing, and the caregivers, whether it's a grandparent assisting, or aunts, uncles, cousins, the village wrapping around. And so I think we've all discovered that that plays a part in mental and emotional health as well. Something that school systems are doing, and hopefully parents are picking up on this as well, is really focusing on social emotional learning. Children are getting screened for their mental and emotional well-being. School counselors are not just focusing on scheduling and testing, they're also making themselves available. Many districts have partnered with nonprofit agencies and consulting mental health providers coming in, or either virtually, to offer these services. So one of the beauties about the pandemic is that it has really brought to light the importance of mental health in all sectors, no matter if you're a school or a real estate company. And so I think it's very, that's one of the kind of silver linings about this experience. And I do not envy all of the district level and administrative decisions that have to be made. I can only imagine the stress and pressure of that. And so teachers, the mental health of teachers has definitely, there's a spotlight on that, and different services put in place, as well as some teachers have made decisions to pursue something differently, or maybe to do virtual school from here on out, because guess what? Those who are parents were also juggling the well-being of their own children, while also trying to figure out how to teach. And some other related considerations include screen time. I think if we think back to our well-checked visits with our children, at one point it said 2-hour limit for screen time. I think that has gone out the window with the pandemic. And so certainly something to think about. And the technology woes in terms of you being proficient in teaching your children, and what happens if the power goes out, or if the teacher can't, the sound, doesn't work on the teacher's end. And so again, a big ripple effect that certainly has a systemic effect on mental and emotional health. And then children miss being with their friends. And even those who are back in school, there are still some restrictions and regulations around either masks or different activities that have been adjusted. Again, we've, in these past several months, we're, opening up more, but with the new cases and things of that nature, there are still things to consider as it relates to, again, not only the physical health and well-being, but the mental and emotional health. And so as you think about your children, again, whether they're K through 12 or college or otherwise, are they resilient during this time, or have they been reactive and really felt like they've missed out? Think about the graduations, especially that first year that had to be virtual, or people who didn't have their prom, or things of that nature. Again, the past year or so, things have gotten a little bit better with that, but there are certainly some milestones that have been a little bit different. And so asking your children that you are connected to reflect upon what's going on, having some empathy for the teachers and for the administrators, because they're not only fulfilling a job, they're also trying to do the best that they can. And feel free to type questions in the chat. We're also going to save some time at the end for Q&A if people have questions. And so I just wanted to include this slide because it highlights the mental and emotional needs of children. All the research shows that most of the basic but critical things that kids need fall into 3 categories. Kids want love and security. They want to feel safe. They want to be, feel appreciated, and they don't want to always be lectured to or disciplined. They want to know when they're doing well also. Children need structure and rules. That is very beneficial for their mental health, even though they might give you a hard time about it, because guess what it does? It builds accountability, it builds character, and it helps them understand how to become responsible young adults and adults in the future. And so finding that balance is important, which is a good segue to this last point. Kids need fun and flexibility. A lot of kids have test anxiety and perfectionism at a young age. Many people spend hours and hours on homework, and sometimes frequently only have time to just bathe and go to bed, grab some dinner. And so over time, that can start to weigh on a child. And so another thing to balance off with what was pre-pandemic, we kind of overschedule our kids sometimes, all these activities, great for their resume, great for skill building, but how do we balance that with helping them understand that, guess what? It's not the end of the world if you don't make all A's, or it's not the end of the world if you don't always get the honor roll, or maybe you'll sit out of practice because you have to do a project, or maybe you'll figure out what you want to do. And in addition to that, with the pandemic, I think where we started to see the mental health of kids decline is we saw the impact of kids being enclosed and not having the luxury of being outside, being connected to their peers. And so kids need physical activity. Kids need to run around, move around. Kids need to be outside. Kids need to socialize. And kids need to find ways to balance their academic pursuits and their family responsibilities and environment. And so keeping that in mind as we're coming out of the pandemic, but also in general as it relates to if we do go through another wave, or if there are some decisions, some people have made permanent decisions to do virtual from here on out, how are you balancing that with social connections, with emotional nurturing and things of that nature? This next slide talks about caregiving and the community. I think we all know that, as it relates to caregivers, there's a couple of different ways to look at it. So if you're in that sandwich generation, you're taking care of your child while also maybe looking after an elder parent or grandparent. And so that definitely has been a big stressor during the pandemic in terms of resources and time and safety and things of that nature. Also, caregiver burnout as it relates to first responders, whether it be the medical field, or and I'm going to put teachers in this category because they again thrust in to figure out how to, again, they're not responding to medical emergencies or medical needs, but definitely that's a priority in terms of figuring out how are kids going to keep being educated. And then first responders and different workers in terms of city workers and all the things that can't be put on hold just because there's a pandemic, delivery drivers, security, things of that nature, law enforcement. And so thinking about the mental health and emotional needs, and I challenge you, if you are in an industry and you've gone through most of this pandemic and haven't talked to your employees, your staff about mental health, even though we're coming out, the reflective piece is still important. And so asking people, how have they tracked their level of emotional distress? How have you made sense of? And I love that this happened early on in the pandemic. At first, we talked a lot about physical distancing. And so social distancing. And so we quickly transformed that to so that it wouldn't be social distancing, because guess what, as humans we still need social connections. And so we have had to figure out creative ways to do that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but that definitely helps to sustain our mental health and help us thrive and become resilient. Yes, I may not be able to be in your physical presence, but guess what, I can call you on the phone, I can text you, I can meet with you virtually. And that goes a long way for being a filler for that in-person physical touch and physical support. Another beauty of this pandemic has been the growth in philanthropy and volunteerism. Just like with most crisis situations, it kind of warms my heart to see that people are still, kind-hearted and giving of their time and of their resources. And so just people collecting items, distributing food and needs, things of that nature, that too impacts your mental and emotional health, and then transportation services as well for elders, for seniors, for those who are medically compromised and have some mobility challenges. And so all of this is important as you think about, again, not only the impact on caregivers and in the community, but what are the opportunities to kind of continue this kind of giving and thoughtful consideration. Of course, because I'm a marriage and family therapist, I have to talk about couples. And so the sad reality is there has been a rise over the past couple of years, particularly after the first wave, in family violence, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and then also separation and divorce. Because what happens is for families, for couples, who were not, safe and on good terms and had the flexibility and freedom of work and traveling and going here and there, the pandemic forced people to kind of share more physical space for lengthier periods of time. And so all of the strengths were highlighted during that, but sadly, a lot of the stressors and challenges were highlighted during that. And not everybody has proper coping mechanisms and coping skills to work through that. And so the stress for some people of parental responsibilities, work responsibilities, there may have been a partnership where one person worked nonstop during the pandemic in terms of going to a physical place, while the other person might have stayed home with the kids. And they have had equal stressors. And so that's another thing to think about with couples in general. We want to always make sure that we avoid, blaming and pointing the finger and trying to figure out who has it worse. We want to have empathy on both sides and consider how we can utilize open communication skills and things of that nature to really have empathy for one another and talk through the challenges. I always advise couples, when you are faced with obstacles, how can you rally together to fight against the problem instead of each other? And so one of the ways to do that is to practice open communication, figuring out a good time to talk, a good space to talk, some good language and words and tone to use as you're having these sometimes tough but necessary conversations. And time management, that being intentional about your time forces you to say, okay, how can I prioritize my mental health? What can I cut back in my calendar or in my schedule so that I plug in 15 minutes here and 30 minutes there to have some meditation, some mindfulness, some physical fitness, some prayer, whatever kind of feeds your spirit, feeds your soul, and helps you become rejuvenated. Those individual practices help strengthen the bond between couples. Home environment and space is another consideration. Sometimes it's just as simple as figuring out what physical space in your home, for those who are still working for the most part from home, where do you thrive most? For some people, they want to separate where they rest and where they work. So you may not always want to work on your laptop from the bed or set your computer screen up on the kitchen table. And so figuring out what room you work best in. Do you have the proper chair? Do you have the tools? And, how is your posture? Are you noticing any carpal tunnel symptoms? All of these things are important in terms of home environment and space. And then space to be a couple, space to fulfill your parental responsibilities, space to have fun and wind down and shut down the laptop, to do what you need to do for the kids, but to also reconnect at some point, even if it's for 30 minutes at the end of the day before you go to sleep, to reconnect as a couple. And then even thinking about things like sex and intimacy, substance abuse, split loyalties. As I mentioned, some people have had to prioritize work or taking care of other family members. The fiscal management piece is a big part of that. Some couples have really gotten in trouble with too much online spending, deliveries and things of that nature. And so having a kind of meeting of the minds to talk about, okay, what is our budget for, restaurant delivery and food delivery and supplies? Do we want to do drive-through pickup and avoid some of these fees? Or how much are we paying for this or for that? And so those important, necessary, but sometimes tough conversations to have. Those are, I tell people, if you think about your relationship, not only from the standpoint of love and empathy, but running it like a business as well. And so, of course, you need to have strategies and protocols and, a meeting of the minds to kind of figure out how are you running your relationship so that it is going to sustain itself even during crisis times. So because we're talking about mental and emotional health and how to thrive and focus on coping and resilience, before I go through the list of some warning signs, I want to touch on a few things. It is very important from a counseling or therapeutic perspective to keep in mind how your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors impact one another. It is very important to consider, if you're having a certain tape playing over and over in your mind, if you're using certain language, saying certain things, that's going to impact your mood. If you're feeling a certain way, that's going to impact your behavior. You might become stagnant, and that is a risk during the pandemic already for people who work virtually and, have a lot of kind of screen time, not a lot of physical activity. So thinking about those things. Also thinking about how you define coping and resilience and thriving. Coping relates to the skills that you can put in place. Resilience is your ability to kind of rise to the occasion and come out okay or better on the other side. And the same thing with thriving. Can you figure out how to, in spite of, not just settle, right, but fulfill, aspire, still have goals and aspirations, and not just business and financial, but wellness as well. And I always tell people to think about wellness systemically. There's your physical health, there's your mental health, there's your emotional health.
Did we lose her?
Think so. She may log back in. Just give it a second.
Okay.
Are you guys still there?
Yes, yes, we are.
Let me see. I have lost internet connection on, and yeah, we had a power outage. Surprise,
Oh,
surprise. And so I'm still connected on the phone. So now I need to turn.
Storm is coming through, huh?
Let's see. Can you all still hear me?
Yes.
yes.
You can nod or. Okay. All right. So I'll keep going. I'll verbally keep going with some of the maladaptive coping skills. And I am, again, because I'm still using my phone, the power is out at
Okay.
home. So some of the things that you want to, the lights just came back on. Give me 1 second.
Georgia Power. No.
I'll just keep talking until it reconnects.
Okay.
So some of the things you want to look out for in terms of maladaptive coping, which means if you are struggling and having some warning signs about your physical and emotional and mental well-being, these are some things to look out for. Do you have intense mood swings or tantrums? Do you have increased irritability? Do you have crying spells and more anxiety than normal? Are you going through what is considered extreme avoidance or withdrawal? Now, some of that has been from a protective nature because of the pandemic, which makes sense, right? In terms of protecting yourself from risk. But if that transforms into you have little to no pleasure doing the things that you once enjoyed over a consistent period of time, that is a warning sign. If you have substance abuse problems, if you have started, and maybe you drank before or smoked before, but you have increased the use to where it's also become problematic.
You're muted.
So you're muted, Dr. Shay.
Okay. All right, let's get back connected. So that's something to think about. You may have had, occasional use before, but if it's a situation where you're spending more time and money, you're under the influence a little bit more, it's interfering with your work, things of that nature, that is problematic. And I'm trying to share my screen again. Give me 1 second. Another thing is thoughts of suicide. And so that includes a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. Certainly, it makes sense that you will have mood shifts when you are stressed out. But if you start to say things like, life is not worth living, or nobody would miss me if I passed away, or if you start actually thinking about how to harm yourself, if you have access to harm, if you have which is called a means, if you have not identified a social support network that would be there for you for some kind of emergency planning. And a lot of people suffer in silence as it relates to suicidality, but that is definitely, and it sounds counterintuitive, but that is definitely the time to reach out as opposed to withdrawing. And so that's something to think about. Sorry, I'm having problems reconnecting to the screen. Okay, here we go. All right, I think we're back. All right, so the thoughts of suicide, helplessness, hopelessness, and then loss of meaning and purpose. A lot of, as I mentioned, there's one element of the mass resignation that has been freeing for some people, but other people have really just kind of reevaluated life. And so for some people, they have done that in a way to thrive in terms of, you know what, I've always wanted to do this and life is too short. So guess what? I'm going to do it. Whereas other people fall on the other end of the spectrum where they are contemplating their purpose in life and they've lost a lot of drive and passion. Some so much as to not even practice self-care in terms of hygiene and caring how they look and, bathing and things of that nature. Those are all warning signs if you kind of slipped in that regard. And then obviously violence, whether that be emotional violence, physical violence, whether you're acting out, those are signs that help is needed. And I'm going to put all of these up at one time, just in the interest of time. So I mentioned hygiene. Again, thinking about your health systemically, there's a reciprocal effect. You know, sometimes we look as good as we feel, even though sometimes the mask is a facade, right? The metaphor mask, right? Just because, you know, I have my hair done and nails done, or I got a nice haircut, or have on a nice suit and I look good, that doesn't always mean that I feel good. But if there's been a period of time where I haven't been taking care of myself, you know, I'm not bathing, I'm not grooming, I'm not, you know, putting on clothes besides, you know, dressing from the top up because it's the pandemic and nobody can see, or not putting on anything, not caring about how I look. Sometimes it can have a paradoxical effect, meaning, you know what, if you've been in that bed for 2 weeks and wearing pajamas and yoga pants and sweats and t-shirts, get dressed and see what kind of impact that has, you know, on you. Diet and nutrition. Some people are emotional eaters. Some people get into fad diets. Some people on the opposite end of the spectrum, fitness can be a strength, but sometimes that can become an addictive type of behavior. And so finding your balance of how is my hygiene, my fitness, my diet and nutrition serving me well in the ways that matter to me. I want to do well on my job. I want to be fulfilled in my relationship and in my connections to people. And I'm doing it from a health perspective. And so thinking about those things, sleep and rest, thinking about what feeds your spirit as it relates to knowing when it's time to wind down. Do you give yourself permission to rest? We live in this hustle and bustle world, and there's like a badge of honor for especially business people and entrepreneurs about how many hours you work and how many things you're juggling. But guess what? Sleep disturbance can be related to psychosis. And so literally, physically, mentally, and emotionally, our bodies need rest. That's how we recharge. Just like we have to power down our phones and computers, we have to power down our bodies. We have to power down our mind. And so maybe you need to figure out how your sleep environment impacts your mental health and emotional well-being. Maybe you don't need to go to sleep after watching the news for 2 hours. You know, maybe you need to watch something that's going to make you laugh or bring you some joy. Maybe you need to turn the television off altogether and do some prayer and meditation, or put on some soothing music. And so that is another thing that's kind of overlooked in terms of the impact on your mental and emotional health. Spirituality, religion, and faith are important for many people, and a great bolster for mental and emotional health in terms of the sense of hope and purpose and meaning and connection. And so whatever that looks like for you. And then also virtual resources. I think another thing that we've learned during this pandemic is that technology is not the enemy. Technology has been the saving grace. Can you imagine going through this pandemic and having a loved one in the hospital and you weren't able to connect with them virtually? Can you imagine going through the pandemic for some people and not being able to just, after you've been secluded for so long, especially in those beginning stages, and not enjoy a virtual concert? Or connect with your family via Zoom or via Google Meets or one of the other kind of virtual platforms. And so using technology as a resource, looking up some information to both, you know, to kind of help with whatever you're dealing with. And overall, finding a way to have a sense of hope, to give yourself permission to laugh, and having some patience and grace with yourself, because it makes sense that our stress level increases during stressful times, but it doesn't have to be the end all and be all. We still have a choice in how we respond to the different types of stressful situations. And gratitude, that, you know, there have been so many research studies on the impact mentally and emotionally of gratitude. And so just, you know, waking up and going to bed, identifying specific things that you are grateful for, in spite of what you may have lost, what you may be going through, all of the ills in society, you know, with things going on. What are you still grateful for? What do you appreciate about what is and what can be? Because that also leads you to kind of giving your hope some meaning and some attachment. Additional strategies for coping and resilience and ultimately figuring out how to thrive. Figuring out how to incorporate these practices on a regular basis, not just when you're stressed. Making it a regular part of your routine so that it's not a reactive type of situation. It's just like the difference between prevention and intervention. No, we can't prevent stress. We can't prevent, crisis situations, but we can moderate the impact of it because of our coping skills. And so again, do we practice mindfulness or meditation? For many people, prayer, reading scripture, if that's a value of yours, physical fitness and yoga. Again, open communication. The pandemic has forced a separation in the homes also. And so it's very easy for everyone to go to their little island, go to their little room, close the door, and get caught up in all of that routine. Figuring out how to stay connected, even in your home and in your relationships, in your social relationships. And guess what? If you live alone, contact your friends, contact your family, figure out a way to still be connected in a way that's meaningful, and not an additional stressor, because for some people, it's figuring out how to limit your contact with certain people or certain environments, because that can bring about additional stress. And so setting boundaries is the flip side of being open as well. Listening to your partner, listening to your children, listening to your family, your friends, your loved ones, learning from other people's experiences, learning what's unique to you, because guess what? Everything you read in a book or read in an article or see on the television or a movie or a documentary, that might not be for you. Being intentional about figuring out what works for you, your household, and your family. And so that requires some personal reflection, being intentional about that. And then for families, figuring out how to, again, enjoy shared, meaningful activities. I mentioned nature before, but cooking and, art or drama, music, dance, gardening, all of these things. If you've been on the end of the spectrum in terms of very conservative about going out, how can you experience nature? If you don't want to go to the park, how can you enjoy your backyard or find somewhere in the community where it's not a lot of people? If you've been doing the same thing during the pandemic and it's been your one or two kind of stress relievers, but you're getting kind of bored with that, what else can you try that's new? Or what can you learn from somebody that you're close to, picking up a new skill, picking up a new strategy, learning from a different environment? And then lastly, I want to give some specific resources on how to find a therapist. These are some very useful websites, followed with a crisis line. And I want to talk a little bit about not only how to find a therapist in terms of where to go, but what you need to think about. And even sometimes as a therapist, I'll get a random text message from somebody or a call and say, "Oh, I need a therapist. Can you help me?" Or my friend needs a therapist, or we want a counselor. Can you give us some suggestions? So I always ask people to think about several things. One, do you want a virtual provider, or do you want somebody in person? Are you going to use your insurance, or are you going to do self-pay out of pocket? Do you care about demographic factors, the gender of the therapist, the skill set of the therapist in terms of specialty based on what you're coming to therapy to talk about? Do you care if they have a certain religious background or race or ethnicity, a certain experience with certain types of clients? These are things to think about. And what that does is, and you can do that on some of these websites because there are ways that you can filter. But when you're thinking about, some people have never thought about this before. And so thinking about, okay, what do I think would serve me well in terms of these different categories? And I always tell people finding a therapist sometimes is like finding a barber or a hairstylist. It takes a little getting to used to. You have to be open. You might want to think you know what you want. So it's that balance of them providing their skill, you talking about your preferences, and you guys meeting in the middle, but always with you feeling respected, listened to and encouraged. And so as we think about ways to thrive during this pandemic, in closing, we want to think about pausing long enough to do some self-reflection. We want to be aware of the warning signs. We want to be intentional about meaningful connections with other people and thoughtful activities, balancing that with sleep and rest and the medical care that we need. And yes, also the mental health care and support that we may also need. Two last websites that I did not put on the slide. If you are interested in mental health education or information about mental illness, and when I stop sharing my screen, I'll type these in the chat. NAMI, NAMI.org, and the Mental Health Association, and their website, if I'm not mistaken, is MHAnational.org. If you want to know what are the symptoms of bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, or all of the many conditions, how do I know if I have a problem with addiction? So those are sites where you can get resources and education and also statistics, and you can couple that with the information and the resources on how to find a therapist. Again, thank you for the time. Thank you for your patience with the technology interruptions, and I will stop sharing my screen now so that we can have a little time for questions.
Wow. Wow. Great.
Sorry, one last slide. Sorry.
Yes.
This is one of my favorite quotes. Did I go off? Yeah, let me put this back up. One of my favorite quotes for mental health is, let's see. Here we are. When the I in illness is replaced with we, illness turns to wellness. And so my hope is that we understand the importance of social support, your mindset, your personal empowerment, as well as specific strategies and skills as we figure out how to cope and how to thrive. This is my contact information, and I will stop sharing again so that we can chat.
Awesome. Awesome. Few housekeeping. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Few housekeeping rules. I'll just those that did register will get an emailed copy of the presentation, so that you can go back through it and make some notes, and you'll have it for someone in your immediate circle that may need that information. Also, we will be sharing this recording so that you can share it with friends and loved ones so that they can share in this great information we've all been able to experience. So those are a couple things that will happen in the next couple of days so that we can get this information into as many people that may need it as possible. It was a whole lot that jumped out. I got a whole page of notes here. So since I got the floor, I'll go over my questions and then I'll yield the floor to somebody else. But mindful connections. That was a key term that jumped out at me, Dr. Shay, and I equated it to a puzzle. All of us in a family, if it's a 4-person family, is a puzzle piece, and mindful connection you might have to know how each person puzzle piece fit together so that
I think we lost him in the midst of his question. So he lost the floor there.
Uh-oh. Are there other questions while we wait for him to reconnect? Questions about mental health, emotional health, relational health, counseling, therapy? Any specific questions? Feel free to type in the chat if you're able, or just unmute yourself and pose your question.
So I actually have a question, I guess, or maybe it's a comment, but you were talking about finding balance, right? Um, was kind of a theme that I heard throughout. And I think sometimes you sort of get caught up, right, in doing whatever it is that you're doing. And you sort of realize maybe after the fact that you've lost sort of the balance. So I guess I'm wondering, um, to the point that you made about being reflective, like uh, being able to not allow yourself to sort of cross over into that space. What are some ways that we could maybe have more insight before we find that we have already gone too far, right? So I'm just trying to find that, because sometimes I know with myself, I'm always working on something, busy doing these things. And so I'm just kind of wondering, am I missing cues? So what are some things maybe we should be thinking about or be
Yeah, yeah.
reflective on to make sure we haven't already crossed the line, so to speak?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I recommend this personally with
Mhm.
for myself and for
Okay.
family and friends, but also for clients as well. Sometimes you have to, when you're talking about in your individual or personal reflection, sometimes you have to put yourself on the schedule.
Mm.
Um, we have, we live and thrive through our phones, right? Our phones, we're so attached to our calendars. What would it be like if you set your alarm 15 minutes early to meditate or to pray or to sit outside and think and do nothing? A lot of us get so caught up in the busyness of life and what we're doing that we forget how to be. So that's one of the things that I talk with people about individually. And then with families, I'm always thinking about that relational impact. So whether it's with your spouse or with your children, whether you live alone or whether you got 10 people in the home, how are you prompting reflective conversations? When you sit down at the dinner table, so what was the best thing about your week? Or when have you found yourself more stressed out? And, what is something you've done to kind of overcome any challenges? Prompting those kinds of conversations with family, so that it brings about, and sometimes that reminds you to, oh, let me think about that. I haven't really had time to, to have to even ponder that. And so, making the time to do it, and when you need a little extra push, kind of putting things on your calendar, because I bet you look at that 15 times a day to see what's next. Prioritize your own mental and emotional well-being by doing that.
Okay. That's a good one. Thank you. Looks like Michael's back. Michael, were you asking your question earlier? We lost you.
Okay, sorry about that. I heard the response. So my question is similar. Um, as someone in business, I'm connected to the people that work in our environment as well. So how do we kind of check in with those people without prying? It's a business relationship. It's different from a family relationship. You can be a little more investigative with your questions with your family, but with people in your business world that you really want to see them well off, mentally well off. How do you kind of frame those conversations, I guess?
Thank you. I think you're already doing that by having an event like this. And what you do is you bring that into your regular routine. When you have your team meetings or when you have your staff meetings, maybe take 2 minutes at the beginning or at the end to do a reflective icebreaker of sorts. And it doesn't have to be kind of asking people to share, but maybe asking people to think. you know, asking people to set a personal goal that's outside of business, reminding people that, you know, if you're in the office, maybe posting something on the wall, like here are some mental health resources or warning signs. If you're virtual, including that in your newsletter or your you know, taglines or your regular communication. EAP services are big with certain companies for people who are more kind of self-employed, and those options, and not wanting to really just cultivating an environment where people know it's okay to not be okay, and that it is recognizable when you're not okay and it's impacting your work, and it can be handled with care and empathy and guidance and direction instead of always from a punitive nature. Sometimes people withhold or hide or are reluctant because they fear the worst consequences. And so safety on the workplace and in the business is a critical piece to people even feeling comfortable enough to be vulnerable at work. But at a minimum, there's a way that you can plant the seeds and give the information, because guess what? I might not want to tell you certain things as my supervisor, because I might feel like now you're looking at me all the time and connecting it to my performance because you know something now about me personally. And I'm always going to be a little bit anxious, wondering if it's being held against me. But, and it doesn't mean you've done anything to make me feel that way. It's just our own self-consciousness that gets in the way. So you can supplement that kind of curiosity, but trying to be respectful with sharing the information and saying things like, hey, you know, in general, right? Because you also don't want to make people feel like you're calling them out in a group environment. You can just say, here's an article that I found, or here are some resources if anyone ever feels like they need XYZ, or if you're ever experiencing XYZ, here's some things you can do. You can talk to me privately, you can email me, you can, you know, here are some resources. If I'm not the person you want to talk to, here are some other things that you can do, so you can guide them and direct them. But again, it starts with that relationship, the safety.
Awesome. Thank you again, Dr. Shay. Thank you. We're right at the hour. I failed to mention a few things. Dr. Shay has 2 books. One is Love, Life, Loss, and The New Life. And she also has Grief, Growth, Grace, and Gratitude, volume 2 on that grief, growth, grace, and gratitude. So those are some things that you can really pick up as a supplemental materials to help you, or pass them along to a friend that you might think could benefit from the information. But thank you again, Dr. Shay. We are totally in your debt for spending an hour with us to talk about this very necessary topic. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and have a good evening, everyone.
With that, we'll say good night.
Bye.